Hello to everyone. Very happy to be able to invite you for this panel, keynote discussions about technology for the green transition. And can you imagine the change? Normally, when we speak of technology for the green transition, we are in a research lab, or sometimes we are with green activists. But today, we are meeting in an official EU meeting. It means that we are setting the scene into the political world. And we're having specialists who are going to speak about how profitable it is in terms of investments. What are the solutions available? So it's, I believe, the proof that things are changing. We are finally understanding that if we only speak about problems, we will maintain anxiety and depression, and also inaction. Because if the problem is too big, we believe that we cannot solve it. And if we now stop to speak only about problems and go for solutions, we will have the possibility to act. But it's not enough to say the possibility to act. What I would like this panel to show is how to act. How to act, because the narrative has to be changed. We are not anymore in this idea that the climate transition is expensive, that it's a burden for the development of the economy. This has created a lot of resistance in the past. And we have seen, even in the last COP, the COP26 in Glasgow, there was resistance from a lot of countries who thought that they would be handicapped in their economic development if they were taking ambitious commitments. So we have to show that the economical development today will only be possible if we put ecology at the heart of the economy. And this starts to be possible. You know why? It's because for decades, the GDP has been coupled with the quantity of the production, the quantity of the consumption, which means the quantity of waste and pollution. And today there are so many new technologies that allow to be more efficient and to couple the GDP with the quality of the efficiency, going into circular economy, going into the reuse of waste, going into efficiency of resources and efficiency of energy. And this is probably what really will push the market forward. It's the fact that the savings on the side of energy, if we become more efficient, will pay for the investments that we need to become more efficient. So of course, there are some upfront investments, but it's an investment and not a cost. A cost is when you lose money, investment is when you gain more money. So people start to speak of investment. We have financial world on board. We have also the need to invest into solutions that we don't have today in order to reduce the green premium. So we see that in a way, it's maybe a bit frightening because we have to change a lot of things. And yes, we have to change all the old polluting and inefficient infrastructures and replace them by modern and clean and efficient infrastructures. But this is a fantastic power to bring to the people. This is why we need leadership. Leadership to set a vision, explain why we have to reach it and how to reach it. So it's not anymore about just management. The political world for a long time has been doing management. Today, what I love with the European Commission, with this vision that the European Commission has, and the foresight that Maroš Šefčovič and Frans Timmermans are introducing now, is that we start to create some enthusiasm. And this is what was missing before. Probably when we have local authorities, or let's say at national level, it's a bit difficult to be ambitious because there are electors who vote maybe each year, and it can be a danger to be ambitious. And we see some politicians who prefer not to move too much in order not to make too many waves. But at the European level, maybe because people are not elected directly by the population, we see much more ambition. We see people starting to put standards, norms, regulations that are really pushing the use of new technologies, that are taking the technologies from the startups to bring them to the market, because there's a real need to use them just to fulfill the and response to the new norms and standards. So we see the importance of policymaking, we see the importance of regulations, the importance of technology, of investment, of activism in order to push all this forward. So it's going to be really exciting, I hope. We will finish by a panel with Johanna Lehne, who is Senior Policy Advisor at E3G, the new generation technology people, and Mettler, Vice President Europe of Breakthrough Energy, and Philippe, who is co-founder of Leaders for Climate Action. And we will start with a keynote of 15 minutes from Markku, who is Vice President of the Committee of Regions. So regions is really something important. We see that very often it's difficult to have the unanimous agreement at the international level. And this creates a frustration. People want to act more, maybe not with unanimity, but with a majority. And regions are at this level now, creating a lot of action, creating a lot of movement, and we will be very happy to listen to Markkula, Markku right now for 15 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. And I've prepared a few slides and the organizers will update them, upload them there. And thank you, Bertrand, for stressing the importance of enthusiasm. That's key. And then taking and getting the solutions on the market. I think that is really, you really raised a lot. And if the organizers put my slides, because in the first one I summed up my 5 key messages, and then that's not the first one. This is an important slide as well, but it comes a bit later. Just go a bit back. That's the one. So since this is the Foresight event, and we are stressing everywhere in all speeches, experts especially are stressing the importance of evidence. So I wanted to make a bit different the presentation. So first highlighting my 5 key messages. I'll go through them quickly, and then based on those, then move to some evidence showing with concrete cases how we are making this transition to happen. But let's start with this, because target definitely is to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and the green transition. So first, I definitely stress that the European Union can support much more than so far the evidence-based, evidence-informed policy making at all levels, backed up by a solid body of scientific research or derived from objective evidence. So it's us, the policy makers, that we need to be ready for this. The second key message is that foresight, and especially the systematic approach in tackling the grand societal challenges, they both are very essential for policymakers on all levels of decision making. So multi-level governance, but it should as well not only be multi-level EU, national, and then regional and local, but inside each organization, the top management, political decision makers in cities, the mayors, we need to be ready to learn, as Maros Šefčovič said in his speech. So the learning is one of the keys on. So everyone we need to learn. The third, my key message is the COR, Committee of the Region. We have a lot of evidence in how to accelerate the targeted transformation by increasing investments in human capital and regional innovation ecosystems. And that's where the new solutions are born. The fourth key message is that the EU missions, now the incoming missions, can and should be really a significant positive transformation, kind of bottom-up movement in increasing the appreciation and respect of research, development, and innovation and knowledge as the only way for well-being and for sustainable growth. And then at the end. So I will highlight a good example what this means at the national political level. As Maros Sefcovic already mentioned, Finland and France are the two countries at the parliament level have done special arrangements to have this foresight and kind of inventing the future as key part of the official decision making. So I'll go with a couple of slides on that as well. But let's now move ahead. So to my first, let's say, content slide. So next slide is about the Joint Research Center. And my key question is that why all around in Europe, why we don't use more the Joint Research Center services? And I just looked through the work program of the Joint Research Center, and then in the opening keywords, so Stephen Quest started that they operate in the interface between science and policy. Yes, great. Their dedication is to make significant effort to share best practices and organizing training events in member states, and then what is important, regions and our international partners as well. And then the third quote from Stephen was that we have an unmissable opportunity to strengthen the role of Joint Research Center at the service of the European project. And when I look throughout, so there are a huge number of these work program descriptions, support initiatives that are ongoing. And my key message is in this slide, and in some of the coming slides, I wrote there a short key message in more detail in the red color that Committee of the Rich, we have increased our focus on the development of local and regional foresight potential. And we have closely cooperated with Joint Research Center and of course, ESPAS, URBAC, and many, many others. But what are now and should be the next steps? And in my next slide, so then I move on what was decided already. The next slide is a summary of the joint action plan signed by the Commissioner Maria Gabriel and all her portfolio units with the Committee of the Regions. So, and there are altogether not less than 26 action points of action areas, and some are highlighted here. First part is very strongly on evidence-based policy making in the regions. The second part in the yellow, so implementing the ERA, the European Education Area, and the Digital Education Action Plan, and the Horizon Europe missions. And then the third, how we can raise the awareness and disseminate the funding opportunities, but especially the content, the exchange of best practices. And here we've been already moving on for a year based on this joint action plan. And if I just highlight with the respect of foresight, so that we just organized together with Joint Research Center and the Covenant of Mayors for our CO members who are the ambassadors on climate and energy on Covenant of Mayors. So we organized a special 3-hour exercise on foresight, on city greening and climate adaptation. So that was kind of a wake-up call for us to move further and deeper on the foresight. And let me here highlight especially the role of the Science Meet regions, because now with starting with the European Parliament, EPRS, Research Services, and STOA, we've been organizing as well together Science Meet regions events. And now just a couple of days ago, Joint Research Center made a decision to start 14 regions or cities, a special foresight exercises as a process on the local level, and how we can learn from that for the others. And if we take the next slide, so then there is what I see from the regional level. So all of those elements on the slide, so they have a clear message, and that's integrated in my own home region, Helsinki, Uusimaa region here in the capital region of Finland. And there we want, and we have committed, or actually we will make the decision in 2 weeks from now in the regional council to speed up, accelerate, to be carbon neutral region already by 2030. And the whole country, government and the parliament have approved that become carbon neutral 2035. So, but it cannot be organized by a specific separate project. It needs to integrate what is there at the bottom, systematic integration of public and private financing. It needs to be more looking for new products and services, the Climate Leadership Coalition carbon handprint tool with industry, integrating smart specialization and getting everyone on board. So in a one word, this is kind of orchestrating the activities. And if we then take the next slide, move ahead. So that is then looking a bit backwards. So what the Committee of the Region has done 5 years ago, during the time I was the president there. So we called our members to prepare to write their own stories, answering the question how they are and can be forerunners in implementing regional innovation ecosystems. And that's a great guidebook explaining what done. Part of the evidence, part of the data was collected with the Joint Research Center. And at the bottom of this slide, I as well highlight the work of the European Parliament Research Services, because they offer those services for us and through us to the members, covering, as you know, so we have more than 300 members, and another 300 alternates as members from all parts of Europe, mayors, regional presidents, and the others. So there is a lot already ongoing and much more that we can do. If we take the next slide then, so that is really showing on that at the regional level, we need to have the targets on the green there, our regional strategy for our Helsinki region. And then if we take the whole area, 10,000 square 10,000 square kilometers, 1.7 million inhabitants. So circular economy, creating kind of circular valley of that. So it means motivating, encouraging companies, different organizations, citizens to move ahead, to take this action. And for this, we can collaborate a lot on a European scale by not anymore just benchmarking, knowing what the others are doing, but using a joint bench learning processes. If we take the next slide, so then that shows a bit more of, so now linking the technology to the European Union missions, I take with 2 slides some concrete examples what is needed. Here is the quantum technology, meaning unprecedented computing power, and as an example, it will enable the new sensing applications, improved simulation of molecules, proteins, and materials for new medicine, and so on. So it's a huge change that is coming, and there we need to integrate more us at the regional level to work with the research centers and the EARTO network. And if I take the next slide, because that's very concrete at the moment in many of the member states, to move to hydrogen power, and that is especially essential in the process industries. Taking the example from northern Sweden together with northern Finland, we have a huge number of steel industry there, pulp and paper industry, and these hydrogen investments. They mean billions of euros needs, but there we need to have the political support, so the certain security, how to invest, where to invest. The companies will do that. So that's part of the recovery as well to get those launched. And I have a few key messages that the research, development, innovation enables Europe to fulfill our global responsibility as well. If we move to the next, that's another kind of approach. So what does it mean, this carbon neutrality for a city? It's not separate actions, but integrating everyone to work. And that is part of my own city, Espoo, how we operate through our normal daily operations to renew the city processes, and there green and digital play a very crucial role. Of course, I don't go to details, but just want to show that there's a kind of map for city servants and our industrial and research collaborators, because everything is based on collaborative spirit and the contracts. And the next slide then brings that to the next, please. There, I just want to show that what you click a few more, because there are a lot of key elements coming on that. So how artificial intelligence is used in our skills center for immigrants, integrating the data safely and ethically. If you click the slide a couple of times, so we will get the whole picture there. And we are using the artificial intelligence how to make a revolution in the city processes. Okay, move to the next. You need now to click more. Next slide, next. How to integrate all these elements to work together. And now if we move then the next full picture, click once more. Change the slide. Okay, there's a lot of more. So, okay, then I took one of the EU examples. So now we are talking especially in the Scandinavian countries about the forests and their importance, but it's as well how to increase the value chain of where wood and timber can be used. On a European scale, there are many activities. This wood circus is a good example of that. So we share the practices. And then next slide, please. This we already tackled in the morning session. So now my message is that we need tailored learning process in each of these. So how to make the transformation to happen, and that we can do with the Commission, with the Committee of the Region and our members and member cities and regions. And next, now we are coming to the Finnish exercise, Parliament of Finland. We officially, at the turn of the millennium, more than 20 years ago, we established a permanent part of the parliament. 17 members of the parliament are always elected for a 4-year term to be members on this committee for the future. I have my own history there, a couple of terms as well. And there we do a lot technology assessment studies. We collaborate with the EPTA, European Parliamentary Technology Assessment Network, and we get our members of parliament enthusiastic, motivated about innovation and how to transfer that. So a lot of this is the dialogue between the government, but as well with public sector and citizens. And if you take this, the last slide, now next, so that's kind of sums up my conclusions is that the key is the young people. Change the slide, please. And click 2 times more. So there comes some of the concrete cases. One more. So, and that's mainly that what we can mobilize. European Committee of the Region, we have introduced a special entrepreneurial year regions, and we are now next year on having that role. And it is very much motivating young people and take the case on the right-hand side. So that's a food delivery company, Volt. You have seen that in the streets of Brussels, and they just, let's say, merged with the largest similar company in the US, sharing the global market. So the young entrepreneurs who established that Volt 10 years ago, now they got a value of 7 billion euros for their own income and stay with the same company group keep on operating from Finland globally. So we need to invest in young people, let them to be the change makers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Markkula. Thank you very much. I think it's very reassuring to see how much is happening at the city level and the regional level. For people who believe nothing moves in the world, I see that things are moving also at local level. So thank you and congratulations. Now we will continue to go into the future. And I think this is exactly what is the foresight of Commissioner Maroš-Šefčovič about. We will speak about solutions that exist and don't exist yet, how to fund them, how to push leaders and business leaders to use them. So we will start with Johanna Lehne. I'm sorry, Johanna, I presented your association very badly in the beginning. E3G is the third generation environmentalist. And what I like very much when I read what you are doing is that you focus on solutions. You know, it's what I love. At the Solar Impulse Foundation, we found more than 1,000 solutions that can protect the environment in a profitable way. And you deal about solutions. So I would like to hear you and learn a little bit more about the type of solutions that you are promoting.
Thank you, Bertrand. It's great to be part of this discussion today. And don't worry about the name. It is a complicated one that we often have different sort of interpretations of. Yes, so in terms of solutions, we're very much focused in particular on the kind of political change that we need to see happen to actually deliver safe climate for all. This is really the focus and our kind of mission. I lead E3G's work on industry transition and on trade policy. And these are two areas where, of course, digital technologies are expected to play a really fundamental role, whether it's around changing how we actually produce and consume industrial materials to, if we look at the kind of trade policy space, how that's going to absolutely transform the types of products and services that we trade globally and the kinds of regulation we need in that space. And a key component of that work has been both thinking around what the opportunities are, how we can harness and really seize on those, but also around managing the kinds of risks, the kinds of tensions that actually rise out of actually bringing digital technologies into this challenge of the green transition. And in that context, I really wanted to focus on two specific aspects in this sort of brief opening statement. The first, which has actually been really nicely already touched on by Markkula, this aspect of really taking an integrated approach to how we think about digital and climate. And the second fundamental point around the importance of actually putting citizens, consumers at the heart of how we think of how we use digital technologies in this space, which really comes out of some work we've been doing on the energy transition specifically. So first on the need for a more integrated approach, this is quite a fundamental point, but it's just an observation from the work that we do, often working and talking to policymakers at government level in different member states, but also with policymakers thinking about these topics in the Commission, is that when we want to talk about digital and climate, we often find ourselves having to talk to very different teams and cabinets and ministries and departments effectively. There is still a very siloed approach when it comes to thinking about climate and thinking about digital. And there is a need for a much more of an architecture that actually allows us to bridge these two issues, to really think about how digital and energy, digital and climate interact, where we can push both agendas to ensure that they don't actually cannibalize each other, but instead strengthen and reinforce each other. Shifting to that approach isn't easy. We actually saw these in Markku's slides, this mapping of Helsinki and all the actors. It's not an easy challenge. It requires a change in mindset, but it's a really fundamental part of getting this right in terms of the governance and the types of thinking you need in this space. So that's one of my first things I'm throwing into the solution space here. The second piece I wanted to talk about was this aspect of citizens being at the heart of when we bring digital technologies into this challenge. So we've looked a lot around what's needed for actually transitioning to cleaner energy systems. And what's really clear to us is that there's no way of getting around the importance for digitalization in that process. It's the only way that governments are actually going to be able to deliver secure, affordable, and environmentally acceptable energy supply going forward. We have commitments from the EU, from different jurisdictions, to see a really rapid decarbonisation of electricity grids over the next 10 years. That's going to require building, connecting, integrating huge volumes of renewables. and making that actually work is going to require a lot of digital innovation. We need network operators to be able to balance the grid with supply and demand changing more dynamically across millions of connected devices. That needs new planning and operational approaches. It requires new markets for grid services. And fundamentally, it requires quite a different role from the consumer and the household in this context, which brings me to this aspect of the kinds of risks and the concerns we have to bring into that. We've seen time and again how smart energy projects have actually failed as a result of questions over data privacy, around surveillance, around thinking about the behaviours in households. Just a couple of years ago in Brussels, there was a proposal to introduce smart meters that was met with resistance from different groups who were worried about how this technology could be used against them potentially. So this is really a call to ensure that from the beginning, we are really thinking about making it easy for consumers to navigate all the different options they face when it comes to digital services in this space, making it easier for them to reduce demand, and really fundamentally ensuring that the regulatory framework we build up around this really does also protect consumer privacy and security. Basically, without that centrality of the household and the consumer and ensuring this is really driven to make sure that citizens' lives are being improved by this, we're going to run into serious issues in delivering our climate targets and delivering our energy targets in this space. So the two messages: much more integrated thinking, really considering citizens and consumers at the heart of this. And I look forward to hearing from everyone else in the discussion after this. Thank you, Bertrand.
Thank you very much, Johanna. Thank you for this insight. Now let's move to Anne Mettler. Anne Mettler is Vice President Europe of Breakthrough Energy. And Breakthrough, we know how important it is for investment in the solutions that are not yet at scale. So Anne, we're really looking forward to listen to you.
Thank you so much, Bertrand. And just to say, it's fabulous to be back at ESPAS. You may not know, but I used to be the chair of ESPAS. So that's why today is actually a very special occasion for me. But let's dive right into the topic. So technology for the green transition. I would say that from a strategic foresight perspective, we need to say a few things up front. So it's very clear that we are sort of on the cusp of a new technology revolution. And of course, that's already been mentioned. It's the clean tech revolution. So, and I believe that this actually will be even bigger than the digital tech revolution was, and it will profoundly shift economy, geopolitics, global finance in a way that I think few of us can even begin to imagine. But the starting point for technology for the green transition is that we will not get to the net zero goals, which we keep mentioning. We will not get to these net zero goals by 2050 with the current set of clean technologies. So according to the International Energy Agency, half of the global reductions in CO2 emissions through 2050 will have to come from technologies that are currently at the demonstration or the prototype phase. That's really important. And given that the innovation cycles in clean tech are anywhere between 20 and 40 years, this really means that whatever we want to achieve in the year 2050 actually needs to be done in this decade. So when people say this is the decisive decade, that is absolutely correct. This is the decisive decade. And it means that we'll need to develop and commercialize essentially a whole slew of new technologies and solutions, be that green hydrogen, sustainable fuels, green cement, carbon capture. There's a whole slew of technologies that need to be quickly developed. So what I would argue is, unlike previous technology revolutions, is that there has never been such a clear goal linked also to such a clear timeline. So in our case, we know that we need net zero emissions by 2050. And I think that this really sort of forces us to address two fundamental challenges. The first one is essentially how to overcome what I would describe as the collective action problem that has always stifled progress on climate. And I think, Bertrand, you spoke very eloquently about it in your own introduction. So we know that apart from Europe, if you really look across the globe, there is really still some resistance to fully embrace the energy transition. So some believe they're too small to make a difference. Others say, I don't want to bear the cost. And yet others say the onus is really on those that have polluted in the past. So bringing about the necessary action within a very limited time horizon that we have is, in my opinion, one of the most pressing governing challenges of our time. And I say this, of course, in the week after COP26, where we saw some of this unfold. Now, the second big challenge that I see is that success in tackling climate action actually rests not necessarily with ourselves, but with the world's largest emitters. And this makes us exceedingly reliant on the action of others. So according to a recent analysis by the Rhodium Group, Europe accounts right now for about 6.4% of global CO2 emissions. And the US, as the second largest emitter in the world, accounts for 11%. But that means the Europe and US, well, I mean, under 20%. China emits more than 27%, and really more than the entire developed world combined. So I'm not saying this to put blame necessarily on China. What I'm saying is, even if we fully decarbonize in Europe and in the United States, it would be far from enough. And that is why I believe we quickly and urgently need a strategy to get clean technologies into fast-growing, highly emitting countries. And the EU's forthcoming global gateway strategy can and really must be decisive here, and would be an excellent instrument to showcase and export the EU's normative power really as a responsible and as a sustainable global actor. What does that mean? That means we need to quickly de-risk investments in emerging technologies. We need to scale up these technologies because, as I said before, right now they're at prototype phase. So we need to scale up these technologies by creating new markets. And if we do that, it will quickly bring down the price, what Bill Gates likes to call the green premium. And then we need to make sure that in this technology revolution, we actually have some homegrown companies that are active in global markets. So the point that I would make here is, yes, this is about climate action, very much, but this is also about industrial policy. And it's very important that all of the colleagues that are working on industrial policy get involved in this, because this is now a global race for technology dominance, supremacy, whatever you want to call this. Europe is not alone yet. Everyone's in this game. It's very important to understand. The very last thing I will say is, in preparing for this session, I was reflecting back to when we started the Battery Alliance in the Juncker Commission. Because that was, in my opinion, an act of strategic foresight. We saw the very clear trend towards electromobility. We saw that Europe was nowhere, was not leading, neither in batteries nor in producing those cars. And it was really then, in my opinion, when Maros Sefcovic saw that, and that maybe prepared him for his current role as dealing with foresight, because he was very clear that Europe needs to get involved here. And now, today, a couple of years later, we are players in global electromobility and in batteries. That would not have happened had we not intervened a few years ago with the Battery Alliance. So I wanted to give this as just an example of the kind of action that is needed, and perhaps give us some room to reflect on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anne. And you're absolutely right to emphasize the role of political leaders in the foresight. Start to imagine what we have to do today in order to make a different future and to be actors of the future rather than victims of the past. But there are also leaders in the economy, in the business, and this is really the field of action from Philippe Singer. So Philippe, what are you doing with the leaders? What do you tell them? And basically, who are the ones who are ready to play a role for the foresight?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I want to spend the next 5 minutes to very honestly tell you about the approach that us, a nonprofit called Leaders for Climate Action, has taken, and also what we have learned in the last 2.5 years of driving climate action in Europe mostly. I brought a little presentation, so I will share it and hope that you can see it. And I want to start in the beginning. So when we founded Leaders for Climate Action about 2.5 years ago, we looked at the European tech industry, at the European digital industry, and we were, to be honest, simply disappointed that there was too much talking and too little action. And we had the feeling that the digital industry easily pointed finger at the bad oil and gas industry, at the bad car manufacturing industry, and is simply not doing enough. And the thing that we believe in is that the digital industry is strategically in a very interesting position, because we can really achieve within the next years to become the first ecosystem that operates completely climate neutral or climate positive, and at the same time brings the healthy organizations. And we believe if we achieve this, we can really also enable policymakers for better decisions and push industries outside of the digital industry to help up with the change. And when we looked at the market, we noticed there are a lot of consultancies out there, but what we were missing is a non-profit organization that simply puts all the focus on the acceleration part of this change. And the way that we do it is a very hands-on approach. We believe you need to be proactive. So within the last 2.5 years, I talked to, I think, 5,000 to 6,000 different managing directors, partners of not only the clean tech companies, but also of the normal big venture capital companies and digital companies. And what we ask these people in the first case is to join on a personal level. So we tell them, we will help you, but before you even think about your organization, you need to measure, reduce, and if you want, compensate your carbon footprint on a yearly basis. And our learning was that if the C-level is on board, the speed of acceleration in the company afterwards is about 3 times faster than if we don't do it with the C-level really personally being committed. In the second step, we asked the company to measure and reduce on the scope 3 emission. And that is very important, not to push this forward for many years, but for a digital company where we talk about server costs, about traveling, about energy. It's something we believe everyone should do in about 6 months. And I call this our climate action pipeline, because this really gets the ball rolling and we control and see if the companies finish at least the first step of their transformation. And by doing this now for the last 2.5 years, we noticed it's not a niche anymore. We are able here to tackle the big tech industry. So we have about 25% of all European unicorns on board. Next week, I'm talking to Volt, actually. So I was smiling when I heard this also in the presentation before. And yeah, basically believing that we need to make it a mass movement. So I think in total, we have about, from almost each European country, one person or company on board. And now I would like to come to my most important point, because kind of the idea that we have is that now is the time to move out of your sphere of control, which is the emission that you control yourself, because that is often limited. And you really have to go into this sphere of influence, which includes how can I make pressure on my end customers? How can I influence my B2B partners? How can I influence my employees? Or how can I support policymakers to have a voice from the industry that says, yes, we can achieve this. And that's basically the strategic framework that we are driving afterwards together. And I would just like to kind of tell you 3 or 4 of the actions in specific that we were doing. So basically in the venture capital scene, we noticed the interesting part is VCs can influence portfolio companies. So we created a clause that forces companies to report to the board how much carbon they have, how they reduce, and what's their goal in the next years. And this has become a voluntary industry standard in Europe, because more than 50 VCs believe that this is something that is important for the future of startups. The other one, together with Spotify, we made the biggest campaign to get more than 20 million Europeans to take climate action themselves by changing energy providers and many things more. And therefore, looking at the time and being a bit short, I just want to encourage that a community of people, of activists, but also of companies, the most important thing is to collaborate on the change and not compete on the change. And I think that needs to be the mindset for us now in Europe that we focus on, but also in the future, because then we can drive all these actions, no matter if it's in politics, if it's in the IT industry, or if it's beyond. So that is maybe the big thought I want to give to you. Take action, don't wait, and collaborate and don't compete. And with these words, I'm looking forward for a short discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Very, very interesting to see everything that exists today in terms of solutions, in terms of investments, in terms of leaders, in terms of potential action. And what I would like to focus on in the next 14, no, even 13 minutes, because we have to end up a little bit before 2:30, our listeners most probably are thinking, what do we have now and what do we need to get into the future? So my first question to Johanna is, what is the greatest idea that you have seen until now that is already existing, not a vague idea for the future, but something that can really make a difference already today, and that can also convince environmentalists and not only the industry to go into it?
Sure, Bertrand, thank you. I'll take an example from an industry that I work on very closely, from the steel sector, where for the longest time we have thought of it as, it's been called a kind of hard to abate sector. It was a sector where we sort of thought, well, this is very difficult in terms of the lack of technologies available. And just what we've seen in terms of the last year, in terms of the momentum from net zero pledges from these companies, from optimism from these companies in terms of what can be done, has just been amazing to see. And we really have a sense of this is being delivered now. So here, what I'm talking about is very much not a kind of digital innovation, but rather one that's really around process innovation, where what we're seeing is a massive change in terms of how we can produce primary steel today using green hydrogen. And where we've seen huge leaps forward by a number of different companies, but in particular pilot project in Sweden, which has really been pushing the boundary, first sort of setting an initial thing of saying, oh, early 2030s, we can provide green steel, and now bringing this forward to the mid 2020s. And that has changed the game in terms of how we think about actually decarbonizing this sector. I think this is really fundamental in the fact that it's an example where we thought change was far off, where it has really sped up, where we've seen a huge amount of competition from other companies coming in and investing in this space. And you see how just how quickly that change in terms of how we understand technical feasibility actually transforms the political space for action. So actually we've got policymakers almost lagging the private sector in this area, and we will need to see a lot more change in this going forward. So that's a really exciting one from a sector where we haven't seen changes in over 200 years, where the sector likes to talk about the fact that it produces steel in the same way as it has always been doing so, and where we're seeing a huge amount of innovation actually happening very quickly now.
Thank you, Johanna. Anne, I would like to come back to you with these questions of the solutions that we have to deploy that don't exist today. Because in a certain way, when we look at it from outside, we can think there is a lot of energy wasted, so we can go into the energy efficiency with a lot of technologies we already have, solutions we already have, buildings, mobility, industrial processes, better heating, cooling systems, and so on. And if we reduce massively the waste of energy, we could say renewable energies could be enough to give the energy to the entire world. So where is your action into this theory? What are you adding? Or let's say, what is missing to get the goal and that you will provide with your investments?
Very good question. So first of all, this is not only about energy itself. I mean, and I think Johanna was absolutely correct when she spoke about green steel. I mean, there are these hard to abate sectors where simply you will not succeed with just saving energy or making things more efficient. So we really do need new technologies. For instance, in the whole agricultural sector, the methane coming from agriculture, you're not just going to get at that by conserving energy. So I do think we need to recognize that technology is a part of the solution. It's maybe not everything, but this is where we see our competitive advantage is in clean technology innovation. And there I am convinced that we need those technologies. I cited the IEA before, and the fact is that, coming back to the example of green steel, it exists, but it hasn't scaled. So it is, what I said before, at this prototype demonstration phase. And as long as it remains there, it will be nice to have, but it will not be transformational. So now, we need to ask ourselves many other questions. How do we generate demand for this green steel that, we need to say in all fairness, is much more expensive than traditional steel? So how do we overcome these challenges of generating that demand? So that's why there are initiatives now, such as the First Movers Coalition that Secretary Kerry put forward. So think about demand. Then we need to think about trade policy. We will have to invest a lot of money in the plants that Johanna just talked about. But then, if it is so expensive and steel comes in, from elsewhere that is much cheaper and is then used, this is not sustainable, these efforts. So we need to think about trade policy. This is why the Commission is putting forward a carbon border adjustment mechanism. So my point is, there are no easy solutions. There isn't one technology. That's why I talked about a slew of technology. But if I had one recommendation to make, is that now we really focus on the hard stuff. So we did wind, solar, we did it extremely well. I just said we are catching up on batteries, electromobility, but there are sectors that are genuinely difficult, whether that's shipping, it's a lot of the transport sectors, it's steel, it's cement, it's the agricultural sector. That is where we need to go now. That's the hard stuff. There are no easy solutions. But this is where I would like to focus the attention and say that this is where we really need to look at, sort of from a very comprehensive point of view, what can we do to decarbonize here? Because we will never get to our goal of net zero by 2050 without that.
And you are incredibly clear. It's always crystal clear when you speak and everybody can understand easily. Thank you very much. Philippe, let's come back to the leaders, and especially in the digital world, because I think this is one of your specialty. We see that digitalization can be a big help to be more efficient, to manage smart cities, smart grids and things like that. But on the other hand, the more digitalization we have, the more data centers we need, the more optical fibers we need to put across oceans, the more energy we use. How do you push leaders to use digitalization in the way that will reduce CO2 and not increase CO2 emissions?
Yeah, so actually we are doing a project there together with the Microsoft Foundation and also one of the biggest energy grid provider in Europe, the Elia Group, where we say, first of all, we need to enable green tracking. So we need to know when is the energy coming from a wind turbine and when is it coming from a coal power plant. And then we need to make sure that the way that we program our services in the future and the way that we use our data centers correlates with it. So for example, if you have the opportunity to, whenever the sun is shining and there's wind, maybe too much wind, too much sun, because at that time we don't need so much energy, you can run your services and your data centers, and whenever it's night and there's no sun, you stop it. In the moment you have a lot of potential to do. And these kind of projects we are doing together with strategic partners. And on the other side, we use the reach and the voice that we have to put pressure on the current data center providers and tell them that we want them to accelerate kind of their innovation. If not, our companies will move away from it.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you, Philippe. We have 3 more minutes, 3 panelists, 1 minute each. Johanna, you are an environmentalist, and sometimes environmentalists are not so keen to introduce technical solutions. They are more keen to go into degrowth. So what is your position on that?
Thank you, Bertrand, for a huge question in 1 minute. I would say that from our perspective, we don't really have a choice around degrowth. I mean, Anne also mentioned this earlier in terms of the huge potential that we need to see in terms of technologies also being deployed in emerging and developing economies. Again, if I look at industrial sectors, the vast majority of that growth is going to come from countries investing in fundamental infrastructure that we absolutely believe has to be part of this energy and climate transition. So I think there has to be an uncomfortable kind of middle ground on this, ultimately. This also comes down to where can we make concessions around changing how we consume? Can we dematerialize in terms of instead of degrowth? Can we think about the types of services we use and change how much materials we need in the first place? This is how I would sort of square that circle. I think we are going to require growth in certain areas. It is going to require new innovations and new materials in certain contexts, but there's a lot we can do in the meantime to actually change how much we need. However, I do think it is an interesting question if I think about the companies that Philippe mentioned. These are companies that want exponential growth. That is totally understandable. But how do you sort of square that with also ensuring that the environmental footprint doesn't go up with that? I think that's a very hard thing for a digital company that is actually wants to become a unicorn, wants that 10x growth to actually conceive of in terms of their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So I'd also be keen to hear from Philippe in terms of how they square that in terms of the companies actually thinking about what the growth means for them and their overall environmental footprint.
Yes, let's use your answer to go directly to Philippe to ask him about that.
Yeah, I actually believe the more digital the company gets, the less the resources that it consumes is aligned with the growth. Not completely, but if you look, for example, at an e-commerce company, which I would not call a total digital company, in the moment you want a 10x growth, it's very difficult because you need to bring transportation and you need to bring packaging and maybe you buy products somewhere around the world. But in case you're a digital company that is only working with data, you need to look at the infrastructure, you need to look at the data center, but potentially you can create a lot of benefits without using so much resources. And therefore, I think the very important thing is to look at the most important issues, which is infrastructure and renewable energy, and make sure that together we come up with solutions that we can decouple the growth with the use of emissions in the end. And I think then we can have these green unicorns of the future. And the other example is that we have some organizations in our community, for example, Enpal. It's the biggest solar company, one of the biggest in Europe, and the first really green European unicorn, who has, like, the success of them align also with the success in decarbonization. So I think these technologies are possible to scale like this. Yeah.
Excellent. In 30 seconds, Anne, you spoke about China being the biggest emitter, but in another way, we can imagine that they have their emissions caused by our consumption because we delocalize in China a lot of the production. 30 seconds to answer that, how to do?
Well, I already spoke about it. We need to review trade policy. I believe that. And my own proposal would be to think about a carbon club, which would initiate a race to the top. If we looked at the kinds of hard to abate sectors, such as steel, and set certain global standards that would force China to produce green steel if they wanted to export to the European market. This is something we need new approaches. We know that what we've done in the past doesn't work. So let's take this seriously and not only look within ourselves, but look at the global system and see how we can really initiate a race to the top, because this is what's needed now.
Thank you very much. We're finishing just in time, which is not easy with so interesting panelists and keynote speakers. Thank you so much, Mr. Markula. Thank you, Philippe. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Johanna. Thank you, Maros Sefcovic, for bringing us together to speak about the foresight of Europe. And goodbye to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.